What determines your place in society? 4,000 years ago, in ancient Egypt, a baby girl opened her eyes for the first time in a gleaming palace along the Nile. As the daughter of a pharaoh, her future was already written in hieroglyphs on temple walls. She would grow up surrounded by servants, educated by the finest scholars, and eventually marry into another powerful family. Her social status determined from her very first breath. Fast forward to 2024. In a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, another baby girl is born, the daughter of a Fortune 500 CEO. While the trappings of privilege have changed from golden palaces to private jets, some fundamental patterns remain remarkably consistent. Like her ancient Egyptian counterpart, this modern child's social position comes with built-in advantages: the best schools, powerful social networks, and access to opportunities that most can only imagine. But here's what's fascinating. While both these children were born into the highest echelons of their respective societies, the rules of the game have shifted dramatically. The pharaoh's daughter had virtually no chance of losing her social status. The rigid hierarchy of ancient Egypt essentially guaranteed her position. In contrast, our modern CEO's daughter faces a more complex landscape. According to research from several European countries, around 60% of families who reached the top 1% of wealth in 1900 had lost that position by 2000. This raises intriguing questions. How do societies determine who rises and who falls? Why do some social hierarchies persist for millennia, while others crumble in a generation? What invisible forces shape our opportunities, and how have they evolved over time? To understand these questions, we need to embark on a journey through time and across cultures. We'll explore how social hierarchies have shaped human civilization, from the strict caste systems of ancient societies to the complex class dynamics of our modern world. Because here's the truth. While we may have moved beyond pharaohs and divine right, the forces that determine social status haven't disappeared. They've just become more subtle and complex. Understanding these forces isn't just an academic exercise. It's crucial for anyone who wants to navigate, challenge, or change their position in our modern social hierarchy. The birth of social class as we know it didn't begin in modern boardrooms or Victorian parlors. It started in the fertile soil of ancient river valleys. When humans first learned to farm around 12,000 years ago, they didn't just cultivate crops. They planted the seeds of social stratification that would shape civilization for millennia to come. Consider this. In hunter-gatherer societies, everyone generally had access to the same resources. But agriculture changed everything. As communities began producing surplus food, a crucial question emerged. Who would control these extra resources? Take ancient Egypt, where we can see one of the most well-documented early class systems. At the top sat the divine pharaoh, believed to be a living god. Below him were the nobles and priests, controlling about 90% of the society's wealth, while representing less than 5% of the population. Then came the scribes and artisans, followed by farmers, who made up the majority of the population. At the bottom were slaves, who had no social mobility whatsoever. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't unique to Egypt. Half a world away, the Maya developed a remarkably similar social structure. Like the Egyptians, they had divine rulers at the top, a powerful priestly class, and a large base of farmers and laborers at the bottom. Both civilizations shared another crucial feature. They used religion to justify their social order. In Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just wealthy, he was literally considered a god. The Maya rulers claimed to be intermediaries between the gods and mortals. This pattern of using religious or cultural beliefs to legitimize social hierarchies would repeat throughout history, from the divine right of kings in medieval Europe to the concept of the mandate of heaven in ancient China. But perhaps the most important innovation of these early class systems was the concept of inherited status. For the first time in human history, your social position wasn't primarily determined by your personal abilities or achievements. It was determined by the circumstances of your birth. Research into ancient Egyptian social mobility suggests that less than 1% of the population ever moved significantly up the social pyramid. This inherited status created what sociologists call ascribed status, a social position assigned to individuals without regard for their innate differences or abilities. This was fundamentally different from the achieved status that characterized hunter-gatherer societies, where leadership positions were often earned through demonstrated skill or wisdom. The implications were enormous. These early class systems essentially created a template for social organization that would influence civilizations for thousands of years. They established principles that still shape our society today. The concentration of wealth at the top, the use of cultural narratives to justify inequality, and the powerful role of inherited advantage. Understanding these ancient origins of social class isn't just an exercise in historical curiosity. Many of the fundamental dynamics established in these early civilizations, the relationship between resource control and social power, the role of cultural justifications for inequality, and the tension between inherited and achieved status, continue to influence our modern social hierarchies in ways that might surprise you. If ancient Egypt gave us the pyramid of social class, medieval Europe perfected it into a divine mandate. The medieval period introduced what might be history's most clearly defined class system: the three estates. Those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. This simple phrase captured an entire worldview that would shape European society for centuries. The first estate, the clergy, made up barely 1% of the population, but controlled vast wealth and, more importantly, access to education and literacy. The second estate, the nobility, comprised about 2% of society and owned roughly 30% of the land. And then there was everyone else, the third estate, peasants and laborers, who made up 97% of the population, but owned little more than their own labor. But here's what's fascinating. This system wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about divine order. Medieval theologians argued that this social structure was ordained by God Himself. Each person's place in society wasn't just a matter of luck or circumstance. It was quite literally their God-given role. This religious justification made questioning the social order not just difficult, but heretical. However, there was one intriguing exception to this rigid system: the church. A peasant's son who showed exceptional intelligence might be educated by the local monastery and eventually rise through church hierarchy. According to historical records, about 5% of medieval bishops came from peasant backgrounds. The role of education in maintaining class boundaries cannot be overstated. Literacy rates tell a striking story. While nearly all clergy could read and write, and most nobles had basic literacy, less than 5% of peasants could read. This wasn't just about access to books. It was about access to power. The ability to read and write Latin was quite literally the key to social advancement. Interestingly, this pattern wasn't unique to Europe. Half a world away, medieval Japan developed a remarkably similar system under the samurai. The Japanese social hierarchy was divided into 4 main classes: samurai, warriors, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Like European nobles, samurai made up about 2% of the population, but wielded enormous power. And just as European peasants were bound to their land, Japanese farmers were tied to their villages through complex systems of obligation and duty. But here's where things get interesting. Despite similar structures, these societies had different approaches to social mobility. While European mobility was primarily through the church, Japanese society occasionally allowed talented individuals to be adopted into samurai families. Historical records show that during the Tokugawa period, approximately 1 in 4 samurai families had adopted members from lower classes, a significantly higher rate of mobility than medieval Europe. The medieval period teaches us something crucial about social class. Formal stratification systems don't just divide society. They create entire worldviews that justify and perpetuate these divisions. The legacy of this period isn't just in history books. It's in how we continue to think about social class today. But perhaps the most important lesson from this era is about the relationship between knowledge and power. The medieval church's monopoly on education shows us how controlling access to knowledge can be just as effective at maintaining social hierarchies as controlling wealth or military power. As we'll see, while the specific mechanisms have changed, the relationship between education and social mobility remains one of the most powerful forces in modern social stratification. Picture a world where your birth determined your entire life story. Then watch that world explode in a revolution of steam, steel, and unprecedented opportunity. The Industrial Revolution didn't just transform how we made things. It fundamentally rewrote the rules of social class. For the first time in human history, wealth could be generated at a pace that outstripped inheritance. Factory owners could become wealthier than aristocrats. Merchants could outspend nobles. Consider the remarkable story of the Rothschild family. In just 150 years, they moved from the constraints of the Frankfurt Jewish ghetto to become one of Europe's most powerful banking dynasties. Their rise represents something unprecedented in human history: the ability to generate wealth so rapidly that it could overcome centuries of social barriers. The factory cities of Manchester, Birmingham, and Detroit gave birth to a new urban class structure. At the top sat the industrial capitalists, factory owners and financiers who controlled the means of production. Below them emerged something unprecedented: a substantial middle class of managers, professionals, and skilled workers. And at the bottom, a new industrial working class faced conditions that were often worse than their agricultural predecessors. By 1870, many industrialized nations had introduced compulsory education, creating what economists call human capital, the skills and knowledge that could help individuals climb the social ladder. The statistics tell a compelling story. In Britain, literacy rates jumped from 30% in 1800 to over 80% by 1900. The second revolutionary idea was meritocracy, the belief that social position should be based on ability and effort rather than birth. This was a radical departure from thousands of years of inherited privilege. Research shows that even during this period of unprecedented mobility, your parents' social class remained one of the strongest predictors of your own social position. Take the case of factory education programs in the late 1800s. While they offered opportunities for advancement, data shows that children of skilled workers were 3 times more likely to be selected for these programs than children of unskilled laborers. For the first time, large numbers of people believed they could meaningfully change their social class within their own lifetime. This shift in mindset was revolutionary. It transformed social class from a fixed destiny into something that could be achieved through effort and opportunity. The Industrial Revolution's legacy for social mobility is complex. While it created unprecedented opportunities for advancement, it also established new forms of inequality. The factory owner's child, like the noble's child before them, still started life with significant advantages. This tension between the promise of mobility and the persistence of advantage would become one of the defining features of modern social class. As we'll see, many of our contemporary debates about social mobility still revolve around this fundamental question. How do we balance the ideal of meritocracy with the reality of inherited privilege? Today's social hierarchies don't announce themselves with crowns or titles. They operate in subtle ways, through invisible networks and hidden forms of capital that shape our opportunities more profoundly than ever before. Welcome to the age of hidden hierarchies. In major OECD countries, the wealthiest 10% now own 76% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% owns just 2%. But unlike previous eras, today's class divisions aren't just about money, they're about access to multiple forms of capital that intersect and reinforce each other in complex ways. Research shows that in 2024, internet access speed varies dramatically by income level. In high-income neighborhoods, median download speeds exceed 93.93 Mbps, while in lower-income areas, speeds often fall below 30 Mbps. In 2024, 91% of employers use social media in their hiring process, and 79% of job seekers leverage social media in their job hunt. But here's the catch. These networks aren't equally distributed. Cultural capital might be the most subtle but powerful form. It's not just what you know, but how you present yourself, your tastes, and your understanding of unwritten social codes. Take Silicon Valley's new elite. While they might wear hoodies instead of suits, they operate with their own complex cultural signals. Research indicates that despite their informal appearance, tech billionaires often come from backgrounds with significant educational and cultural advantages. At top-tier universities, the data reveals stark disparities. Students from higher social classes significantly outperform their lower-income peers due to better preparation and access to resources. In pharmacology programs, for example, 11.5% of students from disadvantaged backgrounds enroll, but their success rates vary dramatically based on their access to additional support systems. Since 2020, gig workers have faced increasing income volatility, with those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds particularly vulnerable to financial instability. In Europe, social mobility varies significantly by country. Sweden's nobility, for instance, held 29% of total private wealth in 1750, but this decreased to just 5% by 1900. research shows that social media influence correlates strongly with traditional measures of social class. Higher class individuals tend to have more platforms at their disposal, over 3 on average, compared to just 1 for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The modern class system is like a complex web where economic, social, and cultural capital interact in increasingly sophisticated ways. Understanding these hidden hierarchies isn't just academic, it's crucial for navigating modern society. While technology and education continue to create new opportunities, they also risk reinforcing existing advantages in ways that are harder to identify and address than the obvious inequalities of previous eras. So what determines your place in society today? The answer is more complex than ever. It's not just about what you own or even what you know, but about how effectively you can navigate these intersecting forms of capital in an increasingly connected and competitive world. The rules that govern social mobility for generations are being rewritten by forces that would have seemed like science fiction just a few decades ago. In 2024, more than 35% of the US workforce are engaged in gig work, with estimates suggesting this could rise to 50% within 5 years. This shift has profound implications for social mobility. However, the data reveals a complex picture. 45.2% of employees with advanced degrees work remotely, compared to just 9.6% of those with only a high school education. Rather than eliminating class barriers, remote work might be creating new ones. While digital platforms promise democratized access to opportunities, research shows that online platform workers come predominantly from privileged class backgrounds. The parents' social class significantly influences the type of work their children do, particularly in professional services and sales and marketing. Artificial intelligence stands poised to reshape social hierarchies even more dramatically. But here's what's fascinating. AI might actually reinforce existing class structures rather than disrupt them. Current trends show that those with higher education and better access to technology are better positioned to leverage AI tools, potentially widening the gap between social classes rather than narrowing it. In 2024, 91% of employers integrate social media into their hiring process, while 79% of job seekers use social media in their job hunt. However, access to these networks isn't equal. Research indicates that higher educated individuals have access to more diverse and influential networks, creating what sociologists call network inequality. Even internet access itself has become a new marker of class division. In high-income neighborhoods, median download speeds exceed 93.93 Mbps, while in lower-income areas, speeds often fall below 30 Mbps. This digital divide isn't just about convenience, it's about access to opportunities, education, and the ability to participate in the digital economy. The relationship between parents' education and children's lifetime earning potential remains strong, with research showing that an additional year of parental education increases children's lifetime earnings by 1.2%. Educational technology is creating new pathways for learning and skill development. Digital platforms are making high-quality education more accessible, though questions remain about whether this accessibility truly translates to increased social mobility. The gig economy despite its challenges, has created new opportunities for entrepreneurship and income generation. However, since 2020, gig workers have faced increasing income volatility, with those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds particularly vulnerable to financial instability. Looking ahead, several key trends could reshape social mobility. The rise of micro-credentials and alternative education pathways that bypass traditional institutions, blockchain and decentralized finance, potentially democratizing access to financial services, AI-powered learning systems that could personalize education to individual needs, and new forms of social capital based on digital reputation and influence. Without deliberate intervention, new technologies often reinforce existing advantages rather than disrupting them. As we move forward, the key question isn't just how technology will change social class, but how we can ensure these changes create more opportunities for mobility rather than new barriers. Our journey through the evolution of social class has taken us from the rigid hierarchies of ancient Egypt to the complex, hidden stratifications of our digital age. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect isn't how much things have changed. It's how many fundamental patterns persist despite these changes. How would you explain to the Pharaoh's daughter that in our modern world, some software engineers earn more than aristocrats? How has our society evolved from one where status was determined entirely by birth to one where it's determined by a complex interplay of inherited advantage, personal achievement, and technological literacy? Think about the role of technology in your own social position. Are digital platforms and social networks truly democratizing opportunity, or are they creating new, more subtle forms of exclusion? When 91% of employers use social media in hiring, but access to professional networks remains highly stratified by social class, what does this mean for real social mobility? Looking ahead, what happens to social mobility in a world where the gap between the top 1% and bottom 50% continues to widen? When the wealthiest 10% owns 76% of all wealth, while the bottom half owns just 2%, how sustainable is our current system of social stratification? Most importantly, if you could redesign our social system from scratch, how would you balance the competing demands of rewarding merit while ensuring genuine equality of opportunity? When research shows that each additional year of parental education increases a child's lifetime earnings by 1.2%, how do we create a truly level playing field? These aren't just academic questions. They're challenges that will shape the future of human society. As we've seen, social class isn't just about money or status. It's about access to opportunity, knowledge, and networks. Understanding these dynamics isn't just about analyzing society. It's about understanding your own position within it and the forces that shape your opportunities. The story of social class is ultimately the story of human civilization itself. Our attempts to organize ourselves, our struggles for fairness and opportunity, and our ongoing effort to balance individual achievement with collective well-being. As we stand on the brink of another technological revolution, the question isn't just whether social class will change, but whether we can guide that change toward a more equitable future.